What a good place to be on the first Sabbath of 2019. Isn't it great to just come together and be able to spend some time to sing, to worship, to pray and meditate and contemplate how good God is to us. I hope that you have had a great week, the first week of 2019. The BBC in London reported Auckland as the first major world city to welcome in the new year. And they had pictures of the fireworks on the Sky Tower and the Harbour Bridge. How many of you were there? Did anyone go in and see it? Maybe not. So, but there did seem to be lots of people there to welcome in the new year. And for most of the Western world, I guess the final moments of 2018 and the first moments of 2019 were likely to have been scenes of partying and revelry and generally forgetting about work and problems and all the things that we have to worry about during the year, and just taking some time to relax and to enjoy. One Herald article reported that these days that we have just experienced between Christmas and New Year are the ones where you hopefully don't have to know what day of the week it is. But anyway, I hope they were good days for you. A little relaxation, some time spent with family and friends, and perhaps a little quiet reflection on what the new year might bring for you. One of our family traditions around Christmas is to share some things that we are thankful for over the past year. And then as we come up to New Year's, we talk about our goals and our objectives, what we want to see happen in the coming year. And we have a phrase, the phrase failing to plan is planning to fail. This is well known in our family and has been repeated quite a few times already in this past week. I was very proud and pleased this week actually. We were driving along in the car. One of my daughters, she said to the other in fairly passionate tones, "You know, you just can't keep on going like this without having any kind of goal or plan around what your savings are going to be for the year. You've got to have a monthly goal and you've got to stick to it. You've got to make it work. And it's got to be the first thing you do, and then you work out all your other expenses around that." And so this is something of a family tradition that has become a little ingrained. The importance of having specific and measurable goals for the year. And so just while we're on that topic, let me give you an example of what specific and measurable means. You know, there's no point in getting all enthusiastic at the beginning of the year saying, in 2019, I'm going to get really fit. I'm going to do a lot more exercise and be really healthy. Of course, these are all wonderful ideals. But in 3 months' time, or certainly on 31 December this year, are you going to know with any kind of certainty whether you have achieved those things? Now I'm really fit. Now I've done a lot of exercise. But how will you know? It will only be your own impression of what you have done. But what about if you said something like this instead? This year, I'm going to make it a goal to run 5Ks in 25 minutes. Now you have something that you know for certain whether you're going to achieve it or not. When you have run 5Ks and it takes 28 minutes, you know that you've still got some way to go. But when you've done it in 24 minutes and 50 seconds, you can celebrate a great achievement. This is the kind of thing that is specific and it's measurable. But this is not what I want to talk about today, although I guess it is very closely related. You know, most people's goals for a year, if indeed they have any, and my guess is probably less than 1 person in 10 actually writes down the goals that they want to achieve for the year. But I would guess that most people's goals are to do with 2 things. They're either to do with health or wealth. People make goals about their weight, they make goals about their fitness, they make goals about their money, they make goals about their savings or buying a house or something that's related to those things. But you know, while wealth and health might be noble goals, they don't really deal with the truly important issues of life. And so today I want to take some time for us to think about making some goals that relate to what is truly important in life. And to begin our discussion, I would like you to open your Bibles to a story in 1 Kings chapter 3. It is the story of Solomon. This is on page 201 of the brown Bibles that are in the seat pockets there. So if you want to get one out and turn to page 201, and if you have one of these kind, this is on page 277. 1 Kings chapter 3. So let's begin in verse 1, and we're going to read through the chapter, and then I'd like to ask you some questions along the way as we go through it. It starts off there and says that Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt, and he married one of his daughters. He brought her to live in the city of David until he could finish building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around the city. At that time, the people of Israel sacrificed their offerings at local places of worship, for a temple honoring the name of the Lord had not yet been built. So, what do we know about this person called Solomon? Anyone want to just yell out something that you know about Solomon? Very wise, yes, and that's why we're looking at this story today. He is reputedly the wisest man who ever lived. What else do we know about this guy Solomon? He was a builder, yes, and he was building several important buildings, wasn't he? The palace, the temple, the wall, he achieved those things through his life. What else do we know about Solomon? What was his occupation, if you can call it an occupation? Yeah, he built his own palace first. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? Solomon was what? He was a king, exactly. He was the king of 2 kingdoms, actually, of Israel and Judah. And of course, those 2 kingdoms at that time were in their heyday. They were very prosperous places. Where is this city of David that it talks about in this verse? What do we know it as? Jerusalem, exactly. So then it goes on and says, Solomon loved the Lord and followed all the decrees of his father David, except that Solomon too offered sacrifices and burned incense at the local places of worship. The most important of these places of worship was at Gibeon, so the king went there and sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings. So what do we know about this burning of incense at the local places of worship? What is this burning of incense to do with? Yeah, it is in the good sense. And in this particular translation, it doesn't come out very strongly, but in other places it indicates that Solomon was offering incense to idols. And he went to these high places, they're called, and they would carry out sacrifices to all of their pagan gods. And interestingly, Solomon is there, and while he is burning incense to idols and sacrificing 1,000 animals in pagan worship, it indicates that God is close by him. It says this: "That night the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said to him, 'What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you.' Solomon replied, 'You showed great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he was honest and true and faithful to you.'" Notice Solomon doesn't quite have it right, but that's okay. "And you have continued to show this great and faithful love to him today by giving him a son to sit on his throne. Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who doesn't know his way around." I think the same could be said for quite a few of the world leaders of today. Perhaps the only difference is that they're not as cognizant of the fact as Solomon was in regard to his own capabilities. "Here I am in the midst of your chosen people, a nation so great and numerous they cannot be counted. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours?" What are you picking up in this story that gives an indication of how Solomon is feeling as he approaches this huge task that is before him? How is he feeling? Is he a little bit apprehensive? Is he a little unsure of how this is going to go? I guess that's probably true for all of us as we approach a new year. How well will it go? What will it be like? What's going to happen? And Solomon has a huge weight of responsibility on him, and he is concerned about it. And then it says that the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom. So God replied, "Because you have asked for wisdom in governing my people with justice, and you have not asked for a long life or wealth or death of your enemies, I will give you what you have asked for. I will give you a wise and understanding heart, such as no one has ever had or ever will have. And I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches and fame. No other king in all the world will be compared to you for the rest of your life. And if you follow and obey my decrees and my commands as your father David did, you will have a long life." What does it tell us about God? What does this tell us about what God is like? What are you hearing in this response from God? Sorry. He trusts him. He trusts him very much, yes. Solomon is a believer in God even while he is doing these other pagan practices. God's favor and blessing is not dependent on whether we might be doing the right thing. Even when we're doing completely the wrong thing, God is there close by. I will give you all of this. Generous beyond imagination. And then it says that Solomon woke up and realized that it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem and he stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant where he sacrificed offerings and peace offerings, and then he invited all of his officials to a great banquet. Sometime later, 2 prostitutes came to the king to have an argument settled. "Please, my lord," one of them began, "this woman and I live in the same house. I gave birth to a baby while she was with me in the house. 3 days later, this woman also had a baby. We were there alone. There were only 2 of us in the house. But her baby died during the night when she rolled over on it. And then she got up in the night and took my son from beside me while I was asleep. She laid her dead child in my arms and took mine to sleep beside her. And in the morning, when I tried to nurse my son, he was dead. But when I looked more closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't my son at all." Then the other woman interrupted. "It certainly was your son," she said, "and the living child is mine." "No," the first woman said, "the living child is mine and the dead one is yours." And so they argued back and forth before the king. An artist's illustration of what it looks like. Then the king said, "Okay, so let's get these facts straight. Both of you claim that the living child is yours. And each one says that the dead one belongs to the other. All right, bring me a sword." And so a sword was brought before the king, and he said, "Cut the living child in 2 and give half to one woman and half to the other." Then it says that the woman who was the real mother of the living child and who loved him very much cried out, "Oh no, my lord the king, give her the child, please do not kill him." But the other woman said, "All right, he will be neither yours nor mine, divide him between us." And then the king said, "Do not kill the child, but give him to the woman who wants him to live, for she is his mother." And when all Israel heard the king's decision, the people were in awe of the king, for they saw the wisdom of God in rendering justice. Now let's think about this story for a minute. What has Solomon discovered in his life? He's still a young man. What has he discovered as being the most important objective in all of life? What is it that is the most important attribute that any of us can have? Sorry. A something heart? A discerning heart, yes. Okay, so we would say it in our thinking that we want to be discerning kind of people, to be able to determine what is the good course of action, what is the best course of action to take. It is the pursuit of wisdom, is it not? In becoming discerning and understanding kind of people. And most of all, it's the understanding of people, and it is how human nature works. How well do you understand people? How well do you understand human nature? Wisdom is not just about rendering justice. Many of us are not in the situation where this is required on a regular basis. Most of us are not judges. However, we all are, every one of us, are in the situation where we need to apply wisdom in our everyday lives. Wisdom is critically important and is perhaps the most needed attribute of all. So how did Solomon attain this great wisdom that allowed him to understand human nature and people so well? that in this dispute about the baby, that Solomon was quickly able to ascertain who was the real mother. How was Solomon able to do that? What was it that gave him this discernment to be able to choose wisely? Well, there's no doubt that wisdom comes from God. God is the source of all wisdom and understanding, and it seems that God freely gives out this wisdom to everyone and anyone who wants it. We have to desire it. And when we have a desire for wisdom, then it seems that wisdom shows up in your life as it did for Solomon. But as we know, God generally doesn't choose to shout this out from the hilltops. It generally doesn't come about as a supernatural Damascus Road kind of experience. Most of the time, God uses a few simple ways to help us to grow in wisdom. And these simple ways are available to every single one of us if we choose to put it into practice. This is what I found this week as I looked at the ways that people received wisdom right throughout the Bible. Moses received wisdom from his father-in-law. Now, most people don't really quite enjoy this method, but Moses, to his credit, he took the advice of his father-in-law, and it was very wise advice, and it resulted in a huge benefit for the whole family nation of Israel. In the introduction to the book of Proverbs, it says that this whole book of Proverbs is written for the sole purpose to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them to understand the insights of the wise. In Proverbs chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "My child, listen to what I say and treasure my commands. Tune your ears to wisdom and concentrate on understanding. Search for them as you would for silver and seek them like hidden treasures." Imagine if all of us went after wisdom in the same way that we try to get ahead financially in life. What about if our focus was on wisdom instead? Think of what that would be. Daniel, it was said by the king of Babylon, was 10 times wiser than all the wise men in Babylon. And this came about through his God-given aptitude for understanding. And it's interesting to note that it uses the words that he read every aspect of literature. Very interesting. And it talks about him having a balanced judgment. Jesus said this. He said, "Wisdom is demonstrated to be wisdom by its outcome." Wisdom is demonstrated to be wisdom by its results. And Paul wrote that God's purpose was to use the church to display God's wisdom in all its rich variety to the entire universe. So we can see that wisdom primarily comes from a desire to have wisdom. And this learning and wisdom comes through other people, parents, older people who have experience in life, but also young people. I have learned a huge amount of wisdom from young people, from my own children. And wisdom certainly comes through other people. It comes from books and literature. It comes from observing and analyzing the creation that God has put us in, this magnificent world that God has placed us in. So there we have it, through other people, books and reading, observation, contemplation. And this is what I loved in our service this morning, Leah, to sit here, to contemplate, to reflect, to think. This is where wisdom is gained as we think about the things that God has put in our mind. And finally, of course, wisdom comes from practicing wisdom. And the more we practice wisdom, the greater it becomes. So here is the important question as we enter into the days of the year 2019. Will you end this year wiser than you are today? Will you end this year wiser than you are now? How will you know? Will you just get to the end of this year and on Christmas Day, as you reflect back, you'll say, well, you know what? Yes, I think I'm wiser. I think I learned a thing or two through the year. The only way that you will end the year wiser than you are now is to plan for it. Failing to plan is planning to fail. And so I want to urge you not to leave here today until you have a desire and a goal to increase your wisdom further in 2019. You might wonder what measurable and specific looks like when we're thinking about wisdom. And there's lots of ways that this can happen, but I want to just share with you a few examples. And I want you to think about it, what it looks like for you yourself. It doesn't necessarily need to be one like this, but it could be something like this. My goal is to ask a wise person to meet with me 1 hour a month and to share wisdom in my life. You know, this might involve just sitting down, having a talk about the deeper things, the important things in life, and some sharing of wisdom with somebody else. Read 4 biographies of people who have done something significant with their lives. And I will spend 2 hours per week reading those biographies. Think about what that would do too. Read the Bible book of Proverbs and spend 15 minutes a day reflecting and praying on 2 or 3 verses. Invest an hour a month with 3 younger people this year. Take an active interest in their lives and what they're doing. Earning the right to swap wisdom back and forwards. Attend a living wisdom course and pass it. What would our goals look like if we were to desire wisdom in 2019? With a wisdom goal similar to the above, you will have made a conscious choice to expand wisdom. In 3 months' time, you will know whether you're achieving it or not because you made it specific. You will also know that in choosing a wisdom goal, you're investing your time and energy in what matters the most. You're benefiting yourself, not primarily for yourself, but for the benefit of other people. What if every single one of us made some goals this year that focused on increasing our wisdom? What kind of difference do you think that would make, both for ourselves and the people who are closest to us, if we chose to do that this year? In the year 1888, a man by the name of Thomas Edward Lawrence was born in the city of Wales and soon after moved to Scotland. In the early part of the 1900s, he worked as an archaeologist at the British Museum in a place called Carchemish in Syria. Soon after the outbreak of war, he volunteered for the British Army and he was stationed in Egypt. In 1916, he was sent to Arabia on an intelligence mission, and he quickly became involved in the Arab revolt of World War I. Working closely with Emir Faisal, a leader of the revolt, he participated in and he led military activities against the Ottoman armed forces that culminated in the capture of the city of Damascus in October of 1918. But during this time, he wrote and published his best-known book called The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which is the story of his life that was made famous in the movie Lawrence of Arabia. And in this book, The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, he wrote this. He said, "All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake up in the day to find that it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous people, for they may act their dreams with open eyes to make it possible." What kind of person are you going to be in 2019? May we all be people in pursuit of the pillars of wisdom, and may 2019 be a year in progressing what matters the most. Let's pray, shall we? Lord, you have set before us another year that stretches out in front of us, and we have a choice as to how we're going to use this year. We can just continue on the way that we often tend to do, and yet you have said to us, "I want to give you much greater wisdom." I pray that every one of us would go from here making a choice that this year we want to increase the wisdom in our lives, to make a written down specific and measurable plan for that to happen. And Lord, I just pray your blessing on every person as we go from here. May we be as Solomons as we go into our families and our communities. I pray in your name. Amen.